Canada has just moved decisively, quietly, and legally. A $262 million railway initiative will reroute exports away from U.S. ports, bypassing traditional pathways. This is not speculation. This is fact. For decades, U.S. ports exercised leverage over Canadian trade. That leverage was informal, yet powerful. It shaped pricing, timing, and negotiation. Now that influence faces structural displacement. The constitutional and systemic question is clear. Who controls the flow of commerce and through what mechanisms? How far can domestic infrastructure law protect a state's sovereignty while remaining compliant with international obligations? These questions matter because the stakes are high. The power once exercised through dependency is now redistributed through internal authority, procedural control, and legally sanctioned corridors. Canada acted within its statutory powers. The Federal Transportation Authority was engaged. Planning, funding, and implementation all followed law. Every contract, every schedule, every upgrade reinforced control. Sovereignty was exercised quietly but decisively. This is where keynote number 1 becomes relevant. Federal Infrastructure Authority was triggered precisely to secure operational independence, enforce domestic jurisdiction, and ensure that flow of goods is no longer hostage to external political or economic pressure. The move is lawful, structured, and permanent. It demonstrates that power in modern governance can reside in infrastructure, not rhetoric, and in procedure, not confrontation. Federal Infrastructure Authority was activated without legislative spectacle, quietly, procedurally, through existing transport and trade statutes. Funding approvals moved through cabinet-level committees, not emergency votes. Mandates already embedded in national rail policy were used, not rewritten. Agencies acted within delegated power, procurement followed established rules, and implementation timelines were locked early. This mattered because infrastructure law operates below political temperature. Once authority is triggered, reversal becomes administratively complex. Contracts attach, corridors are designated, capacity is planned years forward. This is governance by process, not announcement. The crisis context accelerated coordination but did not alter legality. Institutions behaved predictably, using tools designed for moments of vulnerability. Power flowed through bureaucracy, not rhetoric. Trade law compliance was preserved at every stage, deliberately, systematically, with legal insulation built in from the outset. No discriminatory access rules were imposed. No foreign operator was formally excluded. The investment remained internal, domestic, and neutral on paper. Under multilateral trade frameworks, states retain the right to optimize internal logistics. That right was exercised fully. By avoiding tariffs or quotas, exposure to dispute settlement was minimized. There was no clear cause of action. Regulatory language remained consistent with prior filings and treaty obligations. This constrained external response options. When compliance is intact, retaliation becomes political, not legal, and political responses lack enforceability when the underlying act is lawful. Rail corridor sovereignty was asserted through ownership, access control, and scheduling authority, all embedded inside domestic transportation frameworks. Track upgrades were paired with capacity rights, not merely physical steel. Dispatch priority was codified. Long-term usage agreements favored national routing objectives. This shifted control from market convenience to institutional command. When corridors are sovereign, flow is predictable. Bottlenecks are managed internally. External political pressure loses leverage because the route itself is governed by statute and contract. Rail becomes more than transit. It becomes jurisdiction. Every container that moves under domestic authority reduces exposure to foreign regulatory delay, labor disruption, or executive intervention. This is not isolation. It is insulation. Sovereignty expressed through logistics is durable because it is administered daily, quietly, by systems that do not pause for politics. Port dependency was reduced through substitution, not confrontation. Canadian exports were redirected to ports governed by national law, national labor frameworks, and national security protocols. This altered risk calculations. Fees, inspections, and timing moved under domestic control. Dependency had previously functioned as an invisible constraint. Once removed, negotiating dynamics changed automatically. When access is optional, leverage evaporates. Contracts with Canadian ports extended decades forward, anchoring volume and investment. Infrastructure followed volume, reinforcing the shift. This created a feedback loop. Less reliance produced more capacity. More capacity justified further redirection. Dependency ended not with a declaration, but with a reroute. Systems adjusted, markets followed. Governance tightened around the new flow. Jurisdictional control shifted as authority over movement, timing, and compliance migrated inward from cross-border exposure to domestic administration. Oversight moved from shared space into national systems. Inspections aligned with local regulators. Labor rules became predictable. Environmental and safety standards were enforced by agencies answerable to a single government. This reduced uncertainty. When jurisdiction is clear, disputes narrow. Delays become administrative, not diplomatic. Decision-making accelerates because fewer actors hold veto points. Control over logistics becomes control over outcomes. The shift was not declared. It was implemented quietly through contracts, permits, and routing decisions that redefined who governs each stage of movement. Logistics leverage was neutralized by removing points of pressure rather than challenging them directly. Influence once derived from transit dependency, scheduling authority, and port access discretion. Those levers only function when they are needed. Once bypassed, they cease to matter. There was no retaliation to answer because no hostile act occurred. Capacity existed elsewhere. Flow continued uninterrupted. Leverage collapsed under its own irrelevance. Without choke points, threats lose credibility. Without dependency, negotiation positions flatten. The system no longer responds to external signals because it no longer requires external permission. Power dissipates when it cannot be exercised. Neutralization occurred through redundancy, planning, and foresight, not confrontation. Non-tariff power was deployed deliberately, structurally, and quietly, relying on infrastructure and administrative authority rather than customs duties or trade sanctions. Legal pathways were chosen over confrontational measures. Investment in rail, scheduling priority, and port agreements functioned as instruments of influence. These tools operate continuously, independent of political cycles. They do not require debate, approval from foreign legislatures, or treaty amendments. The shift demonstrates that power can reside in system design, not rhetoric or coercion. Once implemented, the system itself enforces outcomes. Commodity flows follow engineered paths. Delays, fees, or interruptions that might have been leveraged as bargaining chips no longer exist. Instead, authority is embedded in contracts, physical assets, and procedural rules. The result is a durable, predictable influence that cannot be easily reversed or circumvented. This is governance through planning, not confrontation. It is law-driven, procedural, and quietly effective. Path dependence was established by locking in routes, priorities, and investment timelines that create predictable operational patterns. Once a railway corridor is upgraded, prioritized, and integrated with domestic ports, behavior becomes constrained by design. Each shipment reinforces the chosen path. Costs, timing, and capacity are no longer marginal. They are structured. Market actors adjust automatically, aligning with the new flow because deviation is expensive or impractical. Future attempts to reroute, renegotiate, or bypass the system encounter structural resistance. Infrastructure thus becomes both a tool and a barrier, shaping decision-making passively yet powerfully. By embedding authority into operations, the state ensures that control is exercised daily without intervention. Patterns persist because the system rewards conformity and penalizes deviation naturally. This is a long-term strategic advantage, achieved through administration, not confrontation. The corridor, the contracts, the priorities, all combine to create a self-reinforcing logistical ecosystem that guides behavior, constrains leverage, and enforces policy continuously without explicit enforcement action. Executive reversal was rendered effectively impossible once contracts were signed, corridors were upgraded, and port agreements finalized. Authority now resides in legal instruments, not political will. Even a change in administration faces procedural and contractual barriers. Procurement law, long-term planning requirements, and public investment statutes constrain abrupt action. Funds are allocated, work schedules committed, and compliance obligations codified. To reverse the system would require renegotiation, compensation, and regulatory approval at multiple layers, creating delays measured in years. Political statements alone cannot alter established infrastructure. The system enforces continuity because each node, rail, port, scheduling, and oversight is bound by law and administration. Even a high-level executive order would have limited effect, as operational control is decentralized across agencies acting under statutory authority. Implementation follows rules, not rhetoric. Once embedded, change requires process, not decree. The permanence of legal and procedural embedding neutralizes short-term political interventions, ensuring continuity and predictability in operations. Reversal becomes a logistical and legal exercise, not a simple policy decision, which secures strategic advantage for the controlling jurisdiction. Institutional advantage was locked through integration of authority, funding, and operational control into a single, coherent framework. Rail capacity, port agreements, scheduling priorities, and oversight mechanisms were coordinated to function as a unified system. Each investment reinforced the other. The physical network secured access, while administrative structures ensured predictable compliance. Market actors adjusted their behavior in response to consistent rules, further strengthening the state's position. Redundancy and capacity expansion created resilience. Volumes were redirected efficiently, reducing vulnerability to external leverage. The system design effectively neutralized potential points of pressure from foreign governments or operators. Authority is not dependent on temporary measures, discretionary decisions, or political favor. Instead, it is encoded in operational rules, contracts, and infrastructure itself. Daily operation follows legal and procedural design, producing continuous enforcement without additional intervention. The combination of embedded authority, secured logistics, and procedural governance creates a durable institutional advantage. It is self-reinforcing, predictable, and resistant to disruption, demonstrating that power can be exercised subtly, methodically, and permanently through law, infrastructure, and administration rather than overt confrontation or coercion. The Canada Railway move exposes a clear pattern of systemic dependency and legal vulnerability. Reliance on foreign ports created leverage that could be exercised outside formal law. U.S. influence relied on structural gaps, not explicit violations. Canada's response highlights how legal authority, infrastructure, and procedural control can bypass these weaknesses. The lesson is clear: dependence without legal insulation is a strategic risk. Looking ahead, nations that fail to secure internal logistics may face similar disruptions, as the balance of power now shifts toward those who embed control within law and infrastructure. Experts like Jeffrey Sachs have repeatedly emphasized the importance of institutional resilience in global trade. This is a tangible example. Policymakers must anticipate infrastructure-based leverage, or they will be constrained in ways traditional diplomacy cannot fix. This has been a detailed, legally grounded analysis of Canada's $262 million railway initiative. Subscribe for more forensic reporting, precise insights, and expert breakdowns of governance, law, and global power shifts. Stay informed, stay ahead.